Hello, this is Michael Justin Lee. Welcome to another episode of Aspire. Today, we're very happy to be joined by Hayley Batson, a 2022 graduate from New York University with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Theater. Welcome, Hayley.
Thank you, Michael. Happy to be here.
We're very happy to have you here. Haley, your degree from one of the finest artistic universities in the world surely is of great interest to many of our listeners. Haley, can we start all the way back with when in your life you began being interested in the theater arts?
That is that is such a good question, a fun question. I think for me, and I don't know if this is like a similar experience, but I feel like I stumbled into the arts because, well, first of all, my dad was very athletic minded and he played a lot of sports growing up, and so my parents kind of threw me into sports. I did not like sports. I started out as a dancer. I started dancing when I was 3 or 4, and then the theater. It all really started when I was, I want to say 8 or 9, and it was like a summer camp, and we were putting on like a very truncated version of Snow White, and I was Snow White, and I took the whole thing too seriously, and then the teacher basically told me and told my parents I should go like actually get more involved in theater. And so from there, that's kind of where my artistic journey began. And I took breaks here and there, but then I got more seriously involved in high school. My high school had a theater magnet, and so I was a very active participant in that. But then it really wasn't until my right before my senior year of high school that I even knew that pursuing a degree in theater was even a thing, just because like my family doesn't come from a super artistic background. So I'm very grateful for the way everything kind of panned out, because I did not know that you could study theater at school.
That's very interesting. Despite your great interest in theater in high school, you weren't originally planning on attending an artistic program?
You know, I don't know. It's hard to put myself in the space of like what was I thinking? My parents overall were, they always told me to do the things that I enjoyed. And so up until that point, I enjoyed school in general, but I also enjoyed dancing. I think I wanted to pursue more of a dancing route up until I like had some
Hmm.
injuries. But and then I always knew I enjoyed acting. But yeah, I didn't know other people who continued to pursue it professionally or even in an academic setting. And it was my voice teacher, Jared Schwartz, in high school. He was like, "You should go to um, this summer program at Oklahoma City University." And so I did that program the summer before my senior year of high school, and that's when I met all these amazing people. And they're all like, "Yeah, we're getting ready for all of these auditions for college theater programs." And I was like, "What?" And they're like, "Yeah, don't you have everything ready to go?" And I was like, "No, I didn't even know this was a thing." And then I, of course, spoke with my parents, and we did more research, and I had some help, and I got some coaching and everything. And so luckily, it's something where I'm so lucky that I met other people who were able to tell me what was going on. And then it wasn't too late for me to kind of get my materials in order, because that's the other thing I did not know about, was just how it's a very thorough and long process to audition and like pursue a degree in theater.
Yes, indeed. I think our audience who come to us wanting to learn about all sorts of school programs might be very surprised what a an applicant to a dramatic program has to go through. Could you walk our audience through that? How the university application, regardless of university, how that works for those studying towards a BFA?
Sure. And I have no clue exactly how the process has changed, especially since I was applying to start. I started at NYU in 2017, fall of 2017. And so I know some things have started to shift since COVID and also just the use of Zoom. But my experience was there's just the general, first of all, and it depends on the school as well, but there's like a general application for the university. And sometimes, that's just like the basic standard thing. But then in terms of like applying for the artistic program, you'll have to write some artistic statements, as well as there might be a pre-screen. So in general, filming some videos in advance of you performing your materials, your monologues. I decided at that point that I was just going to pursue acting and not musical theater. So I know for people pursuing musical theater, there are more things that they have to showcase. But in a way, I think that any sort of pre-screen is great because you're not having to actually physically get yourself to a campus, or you're going to know right away whether or not you're moving on to the next round. But there's just like general application steps that happen at the beginning, which again, I think that's great because then you're not investing a ton of time if it's a program that's not a right fit. But then after that, I started auditioning for some programs in person, or I would go, like, one of the schools I did apply to was Oklahoma City University. So I actually did travel to that campus to audition. So you first start out by your general application, some of the admin aspect of applying to schools, which, you kind of have to stay diligent and organized with. But after that, you schedule your auditions. And for me, some of those auditions I did in person. I did the bulk of my auditions in, I believe it was January or February. And I went to the unified auditions. I did one weekend and I auditioned for a couple of schools in New York. And then another weekend I went to Chicago, and Chicago Unifieds is where there's the majority of the schools. And I believe they go to LA as well. But that was a great opportunity I had my actual auditions that had been scheduled in advance with certain programs that I was very interested in. But then I also was able to do walk-in auditions. And so you could kind of do the application process in reverse, in that you could audition for a school, and then if they were interested in you, then you could apply to the actual school or college at large. And so that gave me the opportunity to look into programs that I didn't really know about prior, but you could get a feel with who was auditioning you and that kind of thing. And so I cast a very wide net in general because, depending on the program and just depending on the applicant pool, these programs can be very, very selective. And so, I cast a wide net. I didn't know what I was going to expect. I was very fortunate to have some options after all was said and done. I think I auditioned for over 20 schools, and I believe I got accepted.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so I auditioned for over 20 programs. I believe I got accepted into 12. And then I seriously considered like 3. And some people with musical theater, I had some friends who auditioned for the same amount, and they got waitlisted for a couple, and then they got waitlisted for a couple, rejected from a couple, and then, they had 2 or 3 options. And so everyone's different. Everyone's goals are different. I think the other thing that I want to say is also, like, with the whole process, it's about what works for you and what's going to be a good fit for you. And I think that, like, some people also get really caught up in like the names of programs or like the prestige. And so it's such a personalized process, and you just really have to, trust your gut and that kind of thing. But ultimately with NYU, that was my very last audition. And I actually auditioned for NYU in Dallas at the school that was at like the art school that was nearby that I did not attend. But I auditioned in Dallas. It was very anticlimactic. And I think it's because I had already done like 20 different auditions at that point. And so by then I was just like not thinking about it. And then I think the other thing with the whole audition process is some schools you will audition for them one time and then you'll get your decision. There's other schools where they will lead you through multiple rounds with different cuts. That was not the case with NYU. With NYU, you audition for them and then they do an interview process, and that's ultimately how they decide whether or not to accept you. But then also with the acting program at NYU, they have, I believe I don't want to get it wrong, but it's like 6 to 8 different acting studios. Not all of them are where you'll be placed for your first year, but there's that. And then after you do your auditions, it is mostly a waiting game. And that's, in my opinion, that was the toughest part, was just waiting for months and my friends pursuing, more normal degree paths. They knew where they were going once they got accepted into their school. But because of the artistic part of the degree process, I didn't know until the end of April, beginning of May, if and where I was going.
Oh my goodness, that long. End of
Yes.
April, May.
Yes.
Hayley, what were you looking for in general when you were making your decisions about where to apply?
Where to apply? Good question. So, and it's hard for me to exactly put myself in that place because so much has happened. But I knew for me, again, the whole pursuing acting, I think the whole fact that I was even able to convince my parents, not that they have always been so supportive, but they became fully on board with this decision for me to pursue it. I think that because of that, I did still want to find a program that was rigorous academically, and some artistic programs are more of a conservatory, meaning that the bulk of the work is just going to be working on your artistic skills, and there might not be any academic classes. And so I think for me, I did still want some academic structure. I think in general, even back then as like a young artist, I knew that I wanted a program that had the balance, because I also think that I want to be and continue to be a well-rounded person. And so that was kind of one thing, is making sure that I had some academic classes going on, some academic structure. And so that was something that I looked into. So that was the main thing. And then other than that, let me think. I would say that was the prevalent thing. The other aspect was the size of the program and the size of the school and the general, I guess, for lack of a better word, the general vibe of the school. And I guess I'll say that in the end, after all the auditions, because the other aspect was I also wanted to pursue acting. I didn't know if or where I would get into. And so I didn't feel like I could be super duper choosy. But ultimately, the 3 programs that I landed on were, it was between NYU, Syracuse, and Emerson. And I was really, really excited about all of those programs. Just if we're talking from the acting standpoint, I was excited by all 3 of those programs. And so then for me, it became a matter of looking at the school as a whole. And some of it was just like logistic. With Emerson, I toured and it was almost too small for me, which was weird because I didn't think that would be such a huge issue, but it felt like a little too small. And then with Syracuse, almost a little too cold. I still ended up I was going to end up in the north. I was going to end up in the Northeast no matter what it seemed like. A little too cold. I also truthfully did not care too much about sports. They have a really heavy Greek life. There were just certain things that I was like, these aren't my priorities. It's not so much that there were glaring issues with anything. It's just okay, what are my priorities? And then when it came to NYU, it's kind of silly, but it's something where I wasn't going to go tour because I had been to New York before, but it is something that I ended up going to the accepted students day. And I'm really glad I did, because if I hadn't, I probably would have ended up going to Syracuse. It was just something that I was like, oh yeah, this is where I'm supposed to be.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it was something,
Wonderful.
yeah, it was just one of those things you can't even like justify or rationalize. It was like, oh crap, this is where I'm gonna be. And it was something also, a lot of the things about the school, I that wasn't initially what I wanted. I really wanted a smaller a smaller acting program, like a smaller ensemble of people. And NYU in general, they do have it is a really large department, which in a way is
Yes.
actually really cool because you just get to meet so many more people. It's a bigger community. And I think ultimately in retrospect, I wish that I don't have any regrets, but it can be a little overwhelming and it can feel you're a small fish in a very large pond there. But
Hmm.
I ultimately I think that it was such a great I don't regret my choice to go to NYU, essentially is what I'm saying. But it's I kind of went against some of the initial things that I wanted. So
I
that's
see.
my
I see.
that's my long-winded way of answering your question.
Haley, Haley, I'd like to go into detail about the audition process itself. But before we get to that, Haley, to the best of your knowledge, do you know if your your high school academics were a big factor in acceptance into a dramatic arts program?
Yes. My initial answer is yes, and it's something I joke about with my friends that like now if I was applying not just to NYU, but to certain schools like the other school I really when I was applying for programs, I really wanted to go to USC and I thought I crushed my audition, but I don't think my academics were good enough to get me into USC. And I could not tell you, you know, off the top of my head what my academics were. But anyway, I joke with my friends. I'm like, I don't know if I would get in academically anymore to NYU. I was I was a good student in high school. My GPA was pretty solid, but it's funny. I like even freshman sophomore year, I either took summer school or I took online classes. So they were like regular non AP classes so that I could take more arts classes. And so ultimately like my peers who took a lot of AP classes and tougher classes, their GPAs were a lot higher because they got those extra
Mm-hmm.
points.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, I would say with a school like NYU, your academics do have to be on par because I know some really talented people who applied to NYU should definitely have gotten into like their programs and they didn't because their academics weren't strong enough. So
I see.
NYU, I would say it's like 50% artistic, 50% academic.
That's very good to know. Very good to know. Haley, I'm sure all of our audience members who are interested in artistic programs would like to know about the audition process. How did you prepare for it?
Great question. And it's something I don't want to say I feel embarrassed, but I want to acknowledge that it's something that not everyone is able to utilize. So, like I said previously, I went to this summer program, and it just so happened that my roommate and the two girls I was sharing a bathroom with, they were all using the same audition coach. And so, you know, out of like not knowing what the heck was going on, I ended up, you know, I felt so behind in this whole process. And so I ended up utilizing this audition coach. And so I ended up meeting with her, I think virtually and then in person. And there's many different audition coaches. And I could not give you even ballpark like how much they charge and what that's like these days. But ultimately, so I met with this coach and she was the one who helped source a plethora of monologues because I believe I ended up having four and it was like two contrasting contemporary and then two contrasting classical. And then I had to have at least one Shakespeare. So ultimately that part was such a great resource. I had someone else sourcing some monologues for me. And I know there's some people who you can just like literally utilize for that monologue aspect. And now, of course, as someone who's a lot more well read after going through a program, now I feel like I could pick my own monologues. But at that point, I hadn't read enough plays. But anyway, so I started out with this coach. I got my materials. That part was helpful. And then I just had like that general monologue coaching. I ended up using and utilizing like my high school acting teachers. They would work with me a little bit here and there. But ultimately using that coach, I didn't agree with everything, but truthfully, I have to give her a lot of credit because it led me to where I am. But anyway, I used a coach, and so basically she also helped me narrow down, she had a whole list of all of the programs, and she helped me narrow down like, okay, these are your safety schools, these are your stretch schools, and these are your reach schools. I can't remember all the terms now. So ultimately for all of that, that was totally invaluable, especially as someone who had no freaking clue what was going on, because even being in like a high school theater program, no one that I knew, even people who were older than me, no one had pursued a BFA. And so, I was like, I don't know what's going on. And so here I was just kind of like trying to figure it out. And so I'm also very grateful that, again, like I met those people that summer too, because if it wasn't for all of those things lining up, I would not be here. So I used this coach. I started to like learn more about this process, and then we ended up just like going through this process of like we even had like our own kind of unifieds in Dallas, and so she was able to bring in different heads of departments, and then we would audition for those programs right then and there. So that was great because that was also a way to kind of prepare for unifieds in February. So I was,
Yes.
yeah. So that being said, I had a little bit more of a handle on the process, but essentially to answer your question, the monologues, that was helped from a coach. I got that help from a coach. And then I also did have like the support of the people that I had met going through the process. Because I think that's the biggest thing. And the biggest thing I would just advise is to, try to reach out to someone who has gone through the process, or just people who are, pursuing a degree that you're interested in. Because again, I had no clue. I went in so blind. And I'm so glad that it worked out. But it was at times it was a very stressful process, and I just had no clue what I was getting myself in for. So in a way, maybe that ended up being a great thing, because a lot of the people I had met had been preparing for this since their like freshman year of high school. And here I was just kind of like jumping into it like right before applications were due.
Well, congratulations belatedly for that. Hayley, let's talk about when you started at NYU. Which was the school they slotted you for?
So I was placed in the Atlantic acting school.
Did you have any say in which school you would be placed into?
No, I did not. And what's funny is, well, so I don't remember the whole timeline. Before this accepted students day, I did find out what school I was placed in. And so I was placed in Atlantic, and I was like, I've never heard of that school ever. Because the other primary studios are like Strasberg or like Meisner, which are like,
Adler.
yeah, Adler, or Playwrights Horizons. I had kind of heard of all of those, especially because they're named after people. And so I was like, what is Atlantic? And so I don't know. It was something where I was like, I have no clue what this means. Ultimately, I'm so grateful. I'm like a big, big fan of the Atlantic Acting School, and I'm super grateful for the training they gave me. But yes, when you are placed in your studio, you have no say, which is good and bad. And I ultimately feel like it was a great fit for me. And from what I hear and how they describe it, they try to place you. This is based on your interview and your audition. They try to place you based on where they think that you're going to grow, or like what sounds like a good fit. And I know for me at that point, I talked about in my interview, like my just general artistic process. And I'm someone who really likes to sit with a text. I really like to do script analysis. And so that lended itself to being placed in the Atlantic Acting School versus like the one that I can also think of is like Playwrights Horizons. A lot of those artists, they also do enjoy writing and directing. And so there's multiple disciplines at that school. But then, of course, there are some people who get placed in a studio and it does not end up being a great fit for them. And that's kind of a different story.
Yeah. During the course of your 4 years, would you have had the chance to switch schools if Atlantic were not best for you?
Yes. One of those ways, it's not necessarily something I would recommend, but sometimes, people immediately don't feel like they fit into the studio they were placed into. And so ultimately I don't think it's an easy thing. I have seen people switch studios, but then you have to start over into that first year. You don't become a freshman again, but you would start over at year one in that acting school. But otherwise, after your first 2 years of studying in the same studio, you have the opportunity to transfer. You can audition for another studio, which I did. I transferred to Strasberg for a semester, and then I went back to Atlantic. There's also advanced studios like Stonestreet Studios. There's also the classical studio. And so I also ended up spending 2 semesters at Stonestreet, which is, again, the film acting studio. So there's opportunities to move around. There's also people after 2 years who decide to pursue a more academic route or independent study. I think that's also the thing that really attracted me to NYU is there's just so many routes you can go down. You're never stuck. And there's also people who end up just completely transferring and switching majors, which is also a very valid thing too. And people don't necessarily stop being an actor or an artist, but they decide that they'd rather pursue their art outside of class and they just rather shift their study to something totally different. So there's a lot of freedom.
Hayley, do you think entering a school as rigorous as NYU that you could have prepared differently, which would have made the transition even better?
Oh,
A
100%.
transition into university from high school.
100%. I would just say in general, one of the main things I could not have prepared for this, and I can't change the course of my life. I didn't find out that I had ADHD until the pandemic. And so I think if I would have known that about myself, it would have made my life way easier, because one thing I really struggled with was the balance between my artistic classes, which I loved. I loved them so much. Like all of the days, because the way the schedule is broken up for an acting student, you have 3 days that are like pretty much 9 to 5, you're acting. And then the other days you have your academics. I could not do that switch. I also could not focus. My academic classes were so tough for me. So that's just one thing that I can't go back and change. But I didn't really know how to study, if I'm being honest. I didn't know how to study. I had somehow gotten by, and I think it's like kind of true ADHD fashion. I just the work I did in high school, I would just rely on the pressure of a deadline. And to be honest, it hasn't gotten much better, but I would rely on the pressure of a deadline to get things done. But the stakes get a little bit higher once you get to college. And I would redo some of that, because the amount of stress I placed on myself trying to write an essay the night before it's due, I feel like it's unnecessary. Again, I don't know if I was put in that situation now, I don't know if things would be much better, but I think just having better study habits, I just wasn't properly taught them in high school. I think time management, those are just skills that I feel like I'm continuing to work on. So some of them, it's like what can I do? It's like you learn as you go, but I think other than that, just like yeah, general study skills, time management, those are things that would be helpful to have.
Yeah, I've heard many undergraduates say the same thing, and it does make sense, particularly those entering elite universities. Haley, can you speak to arriving in New York City, living in New York? That surely is an experience that anyone requires adjustment to if they didn't grow up there. What was it like for you?
So, what was it like arriving to New York? I was
Yes.
so excited. I was so excited to be there. Also, I think for me, and I love my parents. I love my parents so much, but it was the first time it was like, oh my gosh, my parents are so far away because I'm from Texas. And so
Mhm.
like my parents are so far away. They can't like I felt like I had so much freedom, which is true. Um, and so initially I was on this high and it was crazy because I am naturally at my core, I would say I'm more introverted. I I like my quiet. I prefer just spending time with people more one-on-one than in like super large group settings. And I think maybe I ultimately was trying to do the complete opposite because I suddenly didn't require any sleep. I was so social. I was just, spending time with just as many people as I could. And I think that's also a very common experience getting to school because you're all excited. I wasn't going to school knowing anyone. Um because yeah, I was the only one besides one other person from my high school who ended up going to NYU. So I think everyone was really eager to meet each other. And so, anyway, I was just spending a lot of time with people, trying to get to know everyone. And I've never been so social in my life. It's wild. And eventually that all came crashing down. But I would say the first month, I ultimately was just so happy to be in New York. And I would say in general, that first year, there's like this overwhelming sense of like, oh my gosh, I live in New York City, this is crazy. And you like look up at all the buildings and you're just like, I can't believe this is my life, which is great. That being said, I always like to tell people to just like let them have their first year of living in New York because that's really where you decide whether or not it's for you. And it's okay if it's not for you. It is for me, but other adjustments that I had to make just in general, it's well, first of all, when you start the school year, it's the fall, and the fall is great in New York City. It's amazing. But then once winter starts to roll around, I hate it. It's like suddenly gray and dark, and you'll never see the sun for like 5 months. And then New York becomes and then New York becomes amazing again. So I think just adjusting to that. I think the subways, they take a moment to get adjusted to. There was one point in my life where I didn't know what uptown and downtown meant, and then you figure it out. You take the subway, you take the wrong subway a couple times, and you figure it out. I think it's just all trial and error, and I think that I don't know. You just have to let the city kind of wash over you, and you have to screw up, and you will learn very quickly. And ultimately, people always they always ask me about like what's it like to live in New York, that kind of thing. And they're like, aren't New Yorkers mean? And I would say that New Yorkers are some of the kindest people I've ever met. Everyone is like very focused on their own thing, but if you need something or like the amount of people recently who have been telling me that my backpack is open and I actually prefer to leave like one. I leave I always leave the like front pocket of my backpack open. There's nothing in it, but the amount of people who come up to me and they're like, "Excuse me, ma'am, like your backpack's open." Like people are like generally just looking out for you. And I don't know, I think that's like the best feeling is so know that like in general that like you're never fully alone. Like if you need help in New York, someone will help you.
Hmm. Hmm. Haley, a big attraction of NYU in any field would be the opportunities in the city outside of the university, but surely in the dramatic arts, it's got to be off the charts. Did you have the chance to experience things professionally outside the university in New York?
Are you asking like just like seeing shows or things of that
Yes,
nature?
anything. Yes, anything
Hmm.
drama related. Surely in New York, opportunities are unlimited. Did you get the chance to do much of that while being immersed in your academics as well as your artistic training?
Yes, yes. I do have to say, I feel like it's something I probably take for granted. But yeah, it's amazing. One thing that I was really lucky that I did, or grateful that I did, I was on a, this goes into like dorms and that kind of thing, but I applied to be on what's called an exploration floor. And so it was just like a floor that had more of like a theme or a focus. And so I was on the comedy floor of my dorm. Not to say that everyone was funny. Honestly, there were some people who weren't that funny. It was just, we all enjoyed comedy, I guess. I don't know. But because of being on an exploration floor, our RA got more, like got a bigger budget than other floors. So we got to go, I didn't go to all of them, but we had the opportunity to go see like a musical or a play once a month, just like as a group. I don't remember if we ended up having to, we might have had to spend like under $30 for like a ticket. In general, the university has like discounts, like their own box office with discounts for shows and even sporting events and things uh, at Lincoln Center. You're just kind of spoiled for options, and especially as a student, you have a lot of opportunities, and even just the museums, having free admission to certain museums in New York is really amazing. So yes, to answer your question, so many opportunities, and I don't even think I took advantage of all of them. And
Yeah, I
that
doubt
sounds,
anyone could.
yeah, that, but then also the nice thing is even as an alum, you do still get to retain access to certain discounts and things like that. So that's a great thing that never goes away.
Wonderful. Haley, after the intensive training you've received at NYU, will you be continuing to develop and study further?
Yes. I say yes, but I have not been in class in, I want to say it's been over a year. Now, that being said, I graduated in May of 2022, and then I continued to take some classes during the summer. But ultimately, I if I had my way, I would always be in a class because I just feel most myself when I'm learning and when I'm like meeting other people. And I think as an actor, that's so invaluable. But also, that being said, I think that it's really helpful and important to also take time away from class because that's the only way you'll really be able to integrate and just see what you've actually retained from everything you've learned. And I've had different moments of like taking time off from acting, like when after the pandemic hit, I ended up taking a whole year off from school, from NYU, because everything was online. And, I just ended up taking pretty much the whole year off from acting. I think I did one Zoom show. But other than that, I just took space. And then once I got back into things, I think having just breaks, and they don't have to be a year long, but taking time off, just living, just being a person, you're going to realize, one, do I really enjoy acting? Is this something I want to continue to do? But then also, okay, what skills am I retaining? What am I now bringing to my art, my craft? Now that I've taken some time off, what have I gained just from living and being a person? And ultimately, it's the times that I take a break that I feel like I can then really appreciate the training that I have to fall back on, and then just like the gift that life gives you as an artist. But ultimately, yes, I think that class is never a bad thing. Um, and I think that sometimes you don't even need a class. Sometimes it's just like getting together with friends and making something and just continuing to find little ways to nourish yourself, because I think it's really hard after school to find those moments to just be creative for the sake of being creative, especially once, more real adult responsibilities fall upon you, like just, paying your rent, just taking care of yourself is like a full-time job. So also, I ultimately think just taking class or things like that are about like just continuing to work on yourself and be creative as an artist.
Yes, of course. Wonderful answer. Hayley, big question to wrap up with. What will be your definition of success in the acting field?
That is a really big question. um, my definition of success, at least the way I see it for myself, I think for me, it is the freedom and the ability to work on things that really interest me, that I'm passionate about, and to have the freedom and the opportunity to work with people who inspire me, to work with my friends who inspire me. I think for me, it's never been about fame or anything like that, or even like money, although I think being paid as an artist is so important. I think it's about having the ability to work on things that I really care about, to have that space in my life, whether that's like I'm lucky with like the jobs that I work now, that they're flexible. I think for me it's about just having that space to, when an opportunity for a project comes along, that I can take it and I can immerse myself in it and I can just really enjoy it. Because to me, ultimately, success also looks like sustainability as an artist. And I think that also comes with allowing myself to have the space to take breaks and say that, okay, these next couple months, I'm just going to focus on my health. Or now I'm just going to focus on this. And just because I take a break from acting, that doesn't mean that I'm not an actor or I'm not an artist. And so I think for me, the gift that I've given myself is just the ability to have space and give myself space, because ultimately it's a marathon and not a sprint. And so knowing that just because I take pauses here and there, it doesn't mean that I've given up on my career. And I think that, again, like, success just looks like to have the space and the ability to work on some amazing projects. And then I think ultimately down the line, it would be to have the finances and I would say, the experience to be able to help produce and be a part of projects that I really care about and that can help make an impact in some way.
Magnificent answer, Hayley. Absolutely wonderful. Hayley, I'd like to thank you for joining us. To our audience, we were joined today by Hayley Batson, a 2022 graduate of NYU with a BFA in theater, giving us her insights about applying to, studying at, and then using the skills she obtained from the NYU acting program. Thank you very much, Hayley.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thanks so much for giving me this space to chat. I really appreciate it.
We wish you the very, very best, Hayley. Please keep in contact with us.
Of course.